It begins today. We have a once and every 5-year opportunity to change our food system through the debate on the federal Farm Bill. Farm Bill after Farm Bill, the U.S. has shifted power further away from independent family farms and rural communities and into the hands of global corporations. And we shouldn't be surprised at this outcome because Farm Bill after Farm Bill, we have been responding to their playbook. It's time for us to have our own playbook and make them respond to us. Today, we're joined together to set out our own playbook for a food and agriculture system that works for our farmers and food workers, our rural communities, and all of us who eat. Taking action together, we can shift our farm policies to support food, not feed. In the next 3 hours, we'll have the opportunity to learn about the abusive industrial agriculture system, understand that it doesn't have to be that way, and take action together to demand that our members of Congress put a stop to it. Today, we'll show policymakers that it's a new day and a growing coalition is demanding to be heard. Welcome to the Food Not Feed Summit. Thank you to everyone joining us online and here in person today. Each of us is joining together with a powerful coalition, and none of this would be possible but without the combined strength of our co-hosts. We are agriculture, animal welfare, academia, environment, faith, food, health and nutrition, social justice, and workers, and we're all in this room together. Our mission at Farm Action is to help build strong coalitions, to strip corporations of their ill-gotten power and put it back in the hands of all of us. And we know that everybody has their own reasons why they're here today. It could be to ensure that our farmers can keep farming, to feed our neighbors, to liberate food system workers from abuses, to end billions of farm animals being caged, to protect our soil, water, and air. Maybe it's because the food that the government subsidizes is taking a major toll on our health. We all have our reasons for coming together, but one thing I know is that we can move the ball on all of these issues if we have the policies to support food, not feed. And to do that, we must be working together from our playbook. We're starting today by changing the narrative. In the first hour today, we're going to bust the myths that Big Ag utilizes Farm Bill after Farm Bill to maintain the status quo. We'll bust the myth that we need Big Ag to feed the world. The truth is, we're not even feeding ourselves. The myth that industrial agriculture is climate smart or that it's safe for our health. And the myth that industrial agriculture is inevitable. The truth is, the system we have in place today is the result of intentional policy choices, many of those just made in the past several decades. And those policies can and must be changed. Next, we're going to hear from farmers about how they're working to break away from industrial agriculture's grip and do things a different way. Farmers who have had success out from under this model and what they need so that more farmers can live this story. And finally, in the third hour today, we'll look at the economics and the path to profitability that could be opened up if we had the policies to support farmers growing healthy food for their communities. We'll talk about what this policy really looks like and take action together right in this room to bring our voice to Capitol Hill. And finally, for the people here in person today, we're going to close with a networking session to connect more deeply and share the actions that we each plan to take moving forward. As you listen today, please note your insights and takeaways and think about how you can contribute to Food Not Feed becoming dominant in the food system. I ask that everybody help amplify our message today, tweet using the hashtag #FoodNotFeed, and let's bring the buzz to social media. And finally, let's get ready to bring our voice to Capitol Hill. Today, it's about all of us coming together because together we can shift our farm policies to support food, not feed. We're taking the first steps in creating a food and agriculture system that works for all of us so that we can bring a new playbook for the 2023 Farm Bill negotiations. And it's my hope that we'll see the President of the United States sign his name on a farm bill that serves all of us, not just corporations. Now I'd like to welcome up Scott Faber with the Environmental Working Group, who's going to talk about where our farm subsidies are going and who it is we're really feeding. Scott?
Good morning. And thank you, Angela and Joe, for bringing us together for this incredibly important moment. Any of you who follows food and farm policy has heard the refrain, "Our farmers feed the world." But do we really feed the world? The short answer is no. Wheat is one of the world's biggest food staples, but we only grow a small share of the world's wheat, and that share is falling as we grow less and less. Rice is also one of the world's biggest food staples, and we grow even less of the world's rice than we do of global wheat. We do produce a larger share of the world's corn and soybeans, but we don't produce most of the world's corn and soybeans, and most of what we do grow is feed grains for animals or fuel, not food for people. The truth is, we don't feed the world. In particular, we don't feed the world's hungriest people. Oops, there we go. The vast majority of our food and farm exports go to wealthy countries, as this map of our top 20 export destinations shows. And most of what we do export is animal feed and animal products. 35% of our exports are animal feed, and 21% are meat and dairy products. Oh, sorry. Let's see. Oh no, the clicker has taken control. There we go. Okay, apologize for that. Let's try again. All right. Give you a second to enjoy that fantastic slide. The vast majority of our farm exports go to wealthy countries, as the map you just saw of our top 20 export destination shows. When it comes to food, we mostly export high value products enjoyed in wealthy places like North America, Europe, and East Asia. We don't feed the world, we feed the wealthy. So we don't feed the world. Do we even feed ourselves? Again, the answer is no. For many food categories, especially healthy foods, most of our food is imported. In particular, 2/3 of our fruits and 1/3 of our vegetables are imported, and the share that is imported is growing. While farm subsidies are not the only factor in what we grow and export, they are certainly one factor. Using EWG's farm subsidy database, EWG policy analyst Jared Hayes, who is here in the audience somewhere, Jared. EWG policy analyst Jared Hayes found almost half of the commodity subsidies paid to farmers flowed to feed grains like corn and soybeans, and just 7% flowed to farmers producing fruits and vegetables. That's commodity subsidies. The same is true for crop insurance subsidies. Jared found that 56% of our crop insurance subsidies flow to corn and soybeans, while just 7% flow to fruits and vegetables. Again, the story is much the same for meat and dairy subsidies. While USDA provided almost $50 billion in subsidies to livestock operators since 1995, including almost $20 billion alone in 2020 and 2021, USDA provided virtually nothing to the farmers and food companies producing meat and dairy alternatives. Our farm programs are out of balance. By the numbers, most farmers are not growing feed, but we're doing far too much to support our feed farmers and not nearly enough to support our food farmers. Thanks for listening, and thanks again to Joe and Angela.
Thank you so much, Scott, for that great information. Now we have a short video message for us from Dr. Zach Bush, who couldn't be here in person today. He's an internationally recognized physician and educator focused on health, disease, and food systems, and he's going to be talking with us about the connection between these. Is our dominant food system really safe for our environment and for the health?
It's extraordinary to take a look at how we got here to this place at which our food systems become one of the most existential threats to our own human existence, but also the biology of the earth itself as we look at the acceleration of the extinction event that has occurred over the last 50 years. This comes out of a reductionist approach that we use to food production coming out of the Dust Bowl and some of the decimation that we had done to soil systems worldwide out of a departure from what had been indigenous wisdom for tens of thousands of years, producing crops in cycles of nature, understanding each season and each 7-year crop cycle to be within a greater whole that is always regenerative. Every death giving more birth, every season giving more biodiversity and therefore more adaptation. That had been our trend as a planet as well as a farming industry for thousands of years. And then with the advent of technology allowing us to move from small 2-acre plots to 200,000 acre farms that now exist, we really lost sight of these natural cycles, and we created a decimation to soil biology leading to that moment of the Dust Bowl, and great famine broke out within the United States and other parts around the world. We started to see real food insecurity at scales that had never been witnessed before. With the advent of chemical farming coming out of World War II, with the reductionist belief of how things turn green, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium became the whole equation for biological life within our food system. And by pouring all that NPK fertilizer into our soils, we created lots of green plants, and we created very fast-growing green plants because nitrogen happens to be the accelerator to the carbon cycle within our food system. What we didn't realize we were doing, we were pushing on the accelerator with a heavier and heavier foot with more and more nitrogen to extract the last fumes of carbon out of our soil system in the last 50 years. And so what initially looked like a boon, whoa, all these plants are turning green, more carbon availability than ever before with all this external input of nitrogen, we started to starve those plants of the very vitality within them, and then ultimately starve those soils with the vitality within them. So with the foot stuck down on the accelerator pedal with global nitrogen usage, we have depleted 97% of the Earth's soils from carbon. And with that advent of the loss of carbon cycle, we lost the microbiology within the soil systems, just from a carbon standpoint. But then we added to that the necessity for herbicides and pesticides to treat the weakening immune systems of plants grown in the reductionist approach of NPK fertilizer. And so the weakened plants, unable to ward off pests or create balanced systems of crop diversity or plant diversity within single sectors, became more and more prone to collapse of the biodiversity, therefore collapse of adaptation and resilience, therefore more and more dependent on chemical inputs or a pharmaceutical approach to growing the food that we eat. For that, we of course saw the collapse of human health. The soils within our farming system ultimately are the matrix, are the foundation for which we build the soils within our gut. And as we consumed more and more antibiotics through the herbicides and pesticides within the foods and waters that we were consuming, we denuded our own soils within our bodies, and we uncovered the great human epidemic or pandemic of chronic disease in the late 1990s, leading into the first 2 decades of this century. And so here we find ourselves at the moment of collapse, and we are at very high risk right now of trying to implement solutions that are just as reductionist as the problems that got us here. And so largely what I want to message to all of you is that if we fall into the trap of believing that this is about carbon offsets and carbon markets and carbon inside the soil, we are going to be just as reductionist in our effort to stave off this extinction than we were in creating the extinction. And so we must, in this moment of human history, in our moment of science, understanding that life only happens in its abundance of biodiversity, that we start to remetric what success is going to look like and what regeneration truly means. Regeneration ultimately is a state of adaptation that is born out of biodiversity. For this, we're going to have to remetric our soil and crop systems to respect and revere and support the development of life within our soils, and therefore life within the gut of every animal and human consumer thereof. We need to start to remetric life within us and within our soil systems as the foundation of life. Our government programs for the future of the planet need to start to align themselves within the microbiologic systems of life within our soil, within the vitality of our plants, and within ultimately the vitality of the human system, rather than reductionist measurements of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, carbon, etc. We are not made of nutrients, we are made of a symphonic coordination of life within ourselves. And we can start to measure that now. We have the scientific capability of measuring life systems within soil, life systems within the human body. No longer boiling you down to a blood pressure and a couple of 7 electrolytes that we measure to tell you if you're healthy or not. We are starting to be able to measure the true life cycle and the life vitality within systems. And so we must, as an international community, start to really commend those that are making the effort towards, and then really encourage governments, NGOs, and the like to start to measure life force rather than single nutrients as our measure for success. And so the metabolism of the planet is going to become our measure. And the metabolism of the planet, understanding the cycles of water, carbon, nutrients through the system rather than their static measurement in each compartment, measuring the movement of the carbon water cycle and the nutrients that would follow those, will be our future. And so it is time for us to realize that ourselves as a single planet with one metabolism that can be supported by human endeavor and human creativity and human productivity rather than depleted by. It is time for us to move from the reductionist approach to a truly holistic approach of understanding the vitality of life on Earth.
Okay, so what is the government's role in all of this? I'm really honored now to welcome up U.S. Senator Cory Booker, who will speak to whether the system in place is inevitable or not. What can we do?
Good morning, everybody. I run a risk when I get up to speak that on my team, the hero for me, a guy that's been a hero in my life for a very long time and really leads in my office on this. I joked with him on the way over here. I feel like I'm just your spokesmodel. But if you really want to know the guy that is really at the center of the work that we're doing, he's sitting right here. His name is Adam Zipkin. Yeah. And so I want to just let you know, this is not what he wrote. His speech is very good. I'm about to read it. But I am sitting here getting a little emotional about this. I just got news that another extraordinary friend, who was a friend of this coalition, Simone Friedman, had a loss in her family. And as the reason I was told that she's not here. She's another inspiration to me in my life and work. But I was getting emotional over here because I'm just sitting there thinking about this coalition. The people in this room, like we think it's a small room, but the power of the people in this room. It's like Margaret Mead, what she says, never forget that a small group of people can make a difference, can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And that's what this room is about. And I'm not overstating the fact, I'm really not, when I think that this is a room that reminds me of gatherings like Seneca Falls, that had this audacious belief that there could be equality in this country, especially when it came to suffrage for women to vote. I'm not exaggerating when I look at this room and this coalition, when I think that this is a gathering like we saw in the civil rights movement, small groups of people getting together, or in the abolitionist movement, when small groups of folks, black and white, came together to dream that their country can have liberty and freedom, to make the words of its foundings more true. And this coalition is just about that. Health and well-being, vitality, all that we're talking about today, I listened to the two speakers beforehand and just got energized by this understanding that in communities like mine, a low-income community of color is connected to the farmlands of the United States. We're all in this together, and what we are trying to do is, as we would say in my job, it's a national security issue. It's a global security issue. And so I'm excited to be here. I can't thank everyone enough. Enough of my editorializing. Let's get to Adam Zipkin. Adam and I have been on this journey a long time. In 2006, I became mayor of the city of Newark. And there were a lot of pressing problems, but the wisdom of Adam, he didn't write this, he's very humble, but the wisdom of Adam at that time in my life, he and I have been partners really since 1998, 25 years ago. We knew that we had to solve issues like crime, we had to deal with issues like education, we had to deal with issues like our schools, but we began to see that at the center of so many of these issues was the issue of health and well-being. Children's diets, we now know this, study after study, affect their performance in school. Diets actually have an influence on crime rates. And we began to see that we had to, as an administration, deal with the crisis that we saw was what we had a food desert. And not just a food desert, there was an overabundance of foods that are not good for you. Some people would say that we were living in the midst of toxicity, where children can walk into a bodega and because of our ag policies, they find a Twinkie product cheaper than an apple, not because it represents the true costs, but because we as a country are subsidizing everything in that Twinkie product. Now imagine that all you have, an overabundance of fast food restaurants, highly processed foods, no or little access to healthy, nutritious foods. You got everywhere people saying you can have a happy meal, but the meals are not really connected to happiness. So my team and I worked on this problem. We were living in a food desert. One activist told me, stop saying food desert, say food apartheid. People led this process of creative ideas. They were throwing everything out there. They worked with trying to get a program that would purchase refrigeration equipment. I remember saying these bodegas, they're telling us they can't have this food because they don't have refrigeration equipment. We found ways to get them resources. I started going after supermarkets to bring them in food deserts. I stayed one step short of a temporary restraining order. I so bothered supermarkets to come to the city of Newark, and we got many of them to come in. I'm proud that we had adopt a lot programs for people that wanted to create gardens. And then Adam, one of my favorite things he did is that he really battled. I remember the battles to take entire city blocks. We had like 2 of them and turned them into urban farms. All of these efforts to address the food deserts made a difference in Newark. I have so many anecdotal stories. They had a powerful impact on families' lives, on people's lives. I could see it with my own eyes, the transformative change, but we knew that this problem was a much larger scale than an innovative mayor who had an amazing team. It became apparent that the issue could not be solved in just a city level. It required federal policies. Now, let's fast forward to 2018. Gained a little weight in those years. I may be a vegan, but I was a junk food vegan. I came to the Senate. Adam took like a 50% pay cut to come down to the Senate with me. And he and I went out on a tour with some people in this room, some of my most amazing new friends who educated me. I lent myself to folks who really helped educate a senator. We went out to Missouri, Illinois, and Kansas, and I met with farmers. I want to say Americans that were both Republican and Democrat. That seemed not to matter once we got into conversations about what was really going on. I heard from them consistently that this current farm system we had was really working against the very people, if you look at their ancestry, that protected some of the greatest heritage of our country. Farmers and ranchers were courageous in telling me how decades ago they would have many buyers competing and bidding up the price of their livestock. How they today, though, often only had one buyer. that dictated the purchase price. They told me about how their inputs for their farms had all gone up as the companies began to monopolize underneath them. I heard wrenching stories about farmers who had land in their families. I saw some of the deeds on the wall from the Homestead Act back in the 1800s. But now, after being in their families for generations, they were now losing the family farm because the economics had so changed. Farmers told me about how their current system was created to keep farmers growing commodity crops. All the incentives, like we just heard, were to go commodity crops like soy and corn for animal feed rather than the kind of fresh food to feed their families. Because all of the subsidies in the Farm Bill were created to benefit farmers growing only a handful of commodity crops and not to support the farmers growing the kind of fruits and vegetables. We saw on the charts that were so put up there that 7% is going for the kind of food that actually feeds our families. Now, what I described, it may sound like two separate problems, right? An urban mayor and our farmers in farmlands, but these are not separate problems. Food deserts in New Jersey and farmers and ranchers in the Midwest, we are part of the same broken system that is hurting all of our families. We see this as a symptom of a larger problem that we're not talking about in America. We're all part of a broken system that's hurting everyone, from farmers to farm workers, from families and consumers. We're a frog, metaphorically, in boiling water where we're suffering, but nobody seems to be calling out, or too little people are calling out, especially here in Washington. Let me give this a pointed example, because recently I went back to the multi-acre farm in Newark that Adam made sure got built. It had been over a decade since, almost a decade since he and I were leading the city. And the farm is amazing. It is just beautiful. It is growing countless types of vegetables. I'm a vegan and I couldn't name everything that they were growing. They showed me that they are growing from peaches and apples and blueberries and strawberries, rows of raspberries, and so many other vegetables. But what blew me away was that as we were filming for a documentary, two women came up as if we had planned it just to share their stories. The first woman, amazing elderly African-American woman, told me that she was having serious gastrointestinal health issues. The treatment her doctor prescribed for her was a lot of pharmaceutical drugs at extraordinary expense. She was paying $100 a month, but for these medications, and the government was taking on another $600 a month, $700 a month to treat, I say treat, these diseases, these gastrointestinal issues. But she wasn't settling for that. She found out about this urban farm, and she was able to change her diet dramatically, take advantage of the GusNIP program, which allowed her to double a portion of her SNAP benefits for the purchase of these fruits and vegetables. And boom, when this woman started changing her diet with fresh fruits and vegetable, her gut issues disappeared. Some people say, oh, miracle cure. No, it's just having access to fruits and vegetables. The second woman was in her 80s. She seemed like she was a 20-year-old. She had that kind of vigor and wanted to tell me that she had been a diabetic. Diabetes is exploding in our country. Spending on diabetes in just 5 years has gone up 25%. 1 out of every 3 of our government dollars right now is being spent on healthcare, and not really health. It seems to be disease care. And so here is an 80-year-old diabetic that probably the traditional medical industry say that she's in pretty bad shape. She's got diabetes and she's an octogenarian, but she comes out to this farm, starts to source all of her food. She went vegan. She started an Instagram account. It's a very octogenarian thing to do, bragging about what her vegan diet has done for her because she's off her insulin. Her doctor thinks miracle cure. This is an example of how one federal program used by creative local leaders like Zipkin through the Farm Bill, creating transformative change in the lives of folks who are older and sicker, and many people think are stuck there, medical bills, pharmaceutical costs, but suddenly they are showing us the way forward. A few weeks after that meeting in the farm in Newark, I held a Senate hearing in the nutrition subcommittee. Give a guy from Jersey a gavel. And we had some fun. We had Leah Penniman, a farmer in New York, and Martin Richards, a former tobacco farmer in Kentucky, come in. Both Leah and Martin run programs that purchase fruits and vegetables and other specialty crops from small and mid-sized farms that provide those healthy foods to residents living nearby rural and urban food deserts they focus on in New York and Kentucky. What Leah and Martin both testified was that how this program, this GusNIP program in the Farm Bill, provided those double bucks, like I said in Newark. They said it was a, quote, lifeline to farmers and allowed these small farmers to make a profit, to stay afloat after giving fruits and vegetables to feed the community. It was a program in the Farm Bill that sourced the strength of our farmers, that preserved our heritage. We know the opposite, like companies like Coke and Pepsi make billions of dollars because of the subsidizing of corn syrup. But here is us doing something smart and making sure farmers, America's original entrepreneurs, are making money. And so we are not doing enough in the Farm Bill to subsidize what we want, subsidize what works, subsidize our health, subsidize our farmers, subsidize our children's well-being. And we know that the dietary guidelines that one part of our government is telling us that 50% or more of our diet should consist of fruits and vegetables is incongruent with what we're actually subsidizing. And so this is the year that I am so excited. When Zipkin came to me and said a few years back, you need to switch to the Farm Bill, I laughed, to the Farm Committee, to the Ag Committee, I laughed at him. But now the most exciting part of this year for me is that I'm on the Ag Committee and that we're getting ready to work on issues that fundamentally go to the future of America, to the well-being of America, to the health of America, to those of us of faith, to what God wants us to have life and have it more abundantly. So let's talk policy. We are pushing some bills in coalition with a lot of people in this room. I mean, if you ever told me that I was going to be in a coalition that had everybody from farmers and ranchers to animal well-being people to folks who represent food and farm workers to families looking for healthy alternatives, we've got this massive coalition that's growing. But ultimately, it's about legislation. The March on Washington in the 1960s was not about just protesting, it was about passing legislation. And so here are some bills that if were passed into law and signed by the president, it would make massive changes for the health and well-being of so many people across our nation in Midwestern towns and urban areas. We believe that we should be pushing legislation to create a moratorium on new large factory farms and large factory farms, that these should be phased out. Farmers who are currently trapped in industrial livestock and poultry systems, if we push this legislation, would be eligible for funding to help them transition. They're often locked into a massive debt in these tournament systems that make their lives not far away from the sharecropping of old. We would give them resources to transition them to more sustainable, humane types of farming and ranching. This bill that we have to transform our food and farm system would address the terrible history of the USDA and their discrimination against farmers of color. The Packers and Stockyard Act, one of the greatest pieces of legislation that our forefathers and mothers fought for. We need to update it and strengthen it. so that we can break the stranglehold that massive vertically integrated companies have put on our food system, which is the root cause of nearly all of the injustices that we're talking about here. And we know that we need to put legislation in place to stop these most toxic chemicals that are being used. Zach Bush started talking to me from a scientist, a guy that's like triple board certified, about what these chemicals do to our bodies. Endocrine disruptors linked to cancers. These pesticides have been banned in other countries. Well, we have legislation that would ban these chemicals that we know are hurting our families and our children and our elderly. We should be banning them in the United States. And then big meat packing companies. I mean, we should be elevating the voices of the folks that they're abusing and pass legislation. Our meatpacking companies are more corporately concentrated than in the time that Upton Sinclair wrote his book, The Jungle. And the suffering of those workers needs to be ended. And the torture of animals that no consumer wants to see should be ended as well. Now, look, many people think, Corey, you're unrealistic. Well, I know people accuse you of being unrealistic too. But look at them and say that, you know what? When Alice Paul was the first person to protest in the White House for women's suffrage, people thought she was crazy. They literally put her in an insane asylum because she dared to stand in front of the White House and demand change. They thought that Martin Luther King was a dreamer. They thought all the great activists were dreamers. We are dreamers, yes, but that's what this country has always been about. The people that point to the moon and say it's not a dream, it's a destination. 20 million people in our country, in urban and rural areas alike, live in food deserts. This GusNIP program, if it was scaled up, has the potential to provide access to healthy foods for millions of these people, which could have potentially transformative impacts on their health. And for struggling farmers around the country, GusNIP, if scaled up, can provide them with stable revenue to grow fruits and vegetables to feed their neighbors. But here's the thing. While we spend billions and billions of dollars each year in the Farm Bill on incentives for farmers to grow crops such as corn and soy to feed for animals, we only give $50 million to the GusNIP program right now. This has to change. And the great thing about Washington, when they talk about how much things cost, further subsidizing sugar has a double cost. The taxpayers' cost for the subsidy and the healthcare cost for our country. Funding the GusNIP program, I haven't done the math, but when you take people off of their diabetes medication or their gut medication, like the two women I mentioned, you have a double bang for your buck. We need to start looking at the larger math, the arithmetic of it all. Number two, fruit and vegetable crop insurance. Right now, farmers who grow the crops that we need, that we feed to animals, have access to strong safety nets in the Farm Bill, including crop insurance. Unfortunately, most farmers who grow fruits and vegetables do not have the same crop insurance. We need to change that in this Farm Bill. Number three, conservation reform programs. We have some great conservation programs right now in the Farm Bill. But unfortunately, those are also tilted towards supporting commodity crops and factory farms. In this Farm Bill, we need to make sure that programs like EQIP and CRP that serve the interests of make sure that they serve the interests of specialty crop farmers and provide those essential environmental benefits that we need if we're going to successfully meet the challenge of climate change. Number four, the checkoff program. We need checkoff program reform. So not everybody here knows what the checkoff program. I thought checkoff was a character from Star Trek before Adam sat me down and educated me on this. Not everyone here may be familiar with the federal program. So here's what it does if you were like me years back. Farmers are required to pay into these programs, which are supposed to be there to help market their specific commodity. But too often these dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars a year, end up being funneled to organizations that represent the biggest factory farm producers and are spent in ways that are actually harmful to the interests of independent family farmers who have to pay into them. Reforming these programs for us is a top priority in this farm bill. Number 5, I've mentioned it already, the Packers and Stockyard Act reforms. The Packers and Stockyard Act is a 100-year-old antitrust law that was supposed to keep the big meatpacking companies from getting as big as they have now become. The law worked for more than half a century, but in recent decades, we just stopped aggressively enforcing our antitrust laws, and now we are all paying the price. We won't get all the changes that we want to this law done this year, but we have an incredible guy, Senator Tester. He and I have some of the largest girth in the United States Senate. Tester is leading the charge, and we have to get together with him so we have a chance to win some big victories here. And here is the thing. All of the priorities that I just mentioned, scaling up Gusnick, expanding crop insurance for specialty crop farmers, reforming our conservation programs, reforming the checkoff program, and strengthening this Packers and Stockyard Act, all of them have some amount of bipartisan support already. As my incredible friends who are here that took me out into the Midwest, sat me down at the kitchen table of many Republican farmers, this is not a partisan issue. This is an American issue. It's not about left or right. It's about how will we go forward. Big agribusinesses have their lobbyists. They're going to spend a lot of time and a whole lot of money here in Washington as we prepare this farm bill. One of the ways they preserve the status quo is by keeping their opposition divided, by trying to convince us as Americans that we don't have common cause. Well, we know from the kids in Newark to the kids in the farmland of Illinois, we have common pain, and we can't lose our sight on the common cause. We are the United States of America. Now more than ever, corporations are benefiting from dividing us against each other. Look at our social media and the people that want to keep our eyes on the screens. Look at our TV, 24-hour news stations. They are trying to tell us we are different people. They're trying to tell us to hate each other. They're trying to tell us to morally look down on the other side. But I know something about America. When you sit at a kitchen table of a Republican farmer in Illinois and don't talk about politics up here, but talk about what is really affecting families' lives. When you sit with a Republican farmer on a bale of hay, and you're from Newark, wanted to get one bale of hay for my living room, for crying out loud. And you hear them talk that they can't drink out of their well anymore since the CAFO moved down the street. When you hear from them that they can't fish out of their creek anymore because of the CAFO that moved down the street. I want to end without Adam's words. Adam literally, he had the last thing here, Adam, and I was teasing him. He wanted to quote the Alexander Hamilton, Lin-Manuel Miranda, that we can't give up our shot in this farm bill. God, that is so corny. I mean, I know this is a farm bill and there's a lot of corn. That's why he's the policy guy and I'm the speech giving guy. But next year when we hold this, I want to sit there and I want to see Adam Zipkin up here giving the speech. I'm going to end how I started this journey. If you guys thought literally, I'm serious, I wish you could have been there when Adam Zipkin first came up to me and said, you need to get on the farm bill, on the farm ag committee. And I'm like, I'm from Jersey. Why would I get on the ag committee? But it reminded me of that old saying, first they laugh at you. Then they hate you. Never hated Adam. Then they fight you. And I did fight him to give up another plum committee to get on to be a very junior senator on the ag committee. And then they join you. I have sat down with people from all backgrounds, all political persuasions, all religions. And when you explain to people the simple things I said here, the incongruency of having a farm bill that subsidizes all of this and nutritionists tell us we should be eating something different, they get it right away. When I tell people about the suffering in our nation, where I was campaigning for president and I'm sitting in a senior center in Iowa with people telling me about having to ration their insulin, when I sit with families that see children struggling with obesity and recent doctors coming out saying the solution to this is to staple stomachs, when I see the life expectancy in our country, the suffering, the rates of death, when I see that our healthcare system, the majority of our healthcare spending is done on diet-related diseases, not to cure them, but to treat them. I think so much to my own roots. My parents told me stories about the greatness of America. I mean, it was odd because my parents had lots of stories of facing racism and bigotry, but they loved this country. And my parents tried to tell me that no one is your enemy, that we need to have this understanding that the truth of America is realizing that we are all in this together, is trying to help people understand with empathy and compassion that we need each other. We're each other's greatest hope. And that the people that try to divide us or pit us against us, those are the folks that we need to help change their perspective. And so there's nothing that is more true about our movement than the understanding that what King said about the civil rights movement is even more true about our movement. He said that we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a common garment of destiny, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Injustice for food workers is a threat to all Americans. Injustice for farmers is a threat to all Americans. Injustice to a mom trying to raise her family and find healthy food is a threat to all of our safety and our security. I believe in the idea of America. It is something that has been striven to generation after generation, and now we cannot become mild or meek. We must be bold and ambitious and audacious in painting a picture for this country so exciting that we can be a nation where disease rates are not going up, but they're going down, that we can be a nation where our healthcare spending isn't dominating our government, and instead we're spending on schools and education, we're spending on roads and bridges, science and technology, not diabetes and heart disease, that we can be a nation that, like its heritage, its farmers can thrive and its families can flourish. That is what our movement is about. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, we are in line with the fight for America. And if we come together and stand together and stick together and don't give up, we will make sure that our tomorrows are even better than our yesterdays. And then we can be a nation that truly stands up in the face of disease and suffering, that we are free from that we, the people, are free at last. Thank you.
I think we'd all like to start by saying it was on none of our 2023 vision boards to follow Cory Booker, but we're going to do our best. All right. Welcome everyone virtually and in the room. So excited to be here and to see you all. I'm Kara Shannon. I'm the Director of Farm Animal Welfare Policy, the ASPCA, which is the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, but please, the A for short. We're so excited to be co-hosting the Food Not Feed Summit today and to get to elevate the stories and solutions that some of the great people here have for us. The ASPCA is the oldest animal welfare organization in the country, and we are dedicated to improving the lives of animals, including farm animals. And our work in this space is really focused on helping to build a food system that better reflects people's compassion for animals, that uplifts farmers who are raising animals in higher welfare and in pasture-based systems, and that supports the transition to a more humane food system and to folks who are raising animals in more humane systems or alternative plant-based systems. And we do that work through all kinds of avenues. We're very busy. It's legislative advocacy, corporate engagement, consumer education, and grants to farmers and advocacy organizations. So as all of you are aware, federal policies and corporate consolidation have created a food system today where the vast majority of the almost 10 billion animals that are raised in the US each year are raised in conditions that deny them the ability to carry out their most basic behaviors and come nowhere close to providing them with the really enriched, fulfilling lives that they deserve. The industrial system traps both animals and farmers alike in its inhumane and unjust system. And farmers are especially often trapped in unfair contracts that control everything about the way that they can treat and raise the animals in their care. But as the title of today's panel, Freeing the Farmer from the Industrial Agricultural Treadmill, suggests, there's a strong and growing contingent of farmers who are getting off of that treadmill and building a better food system. And so we're very, very lucky to have 3 of them here with us today. So Craig Watts was unfortunately unable to join us, but we have the amazing Sherry Duggar to fill in his place. And Sherry is the executive director of the Socially Responsible Agriculture Project, or SRAP, which is a national organization dedicating to protecting rural communities from the damaging impacts of industrial agriculture. Prior to joining SRAP, Sherry served in executive director roles at Women, Food, and Agriculture Network and the Indiana Farmers Union. She also has served as a policy and communications consultant for organizations like the American Grass-Fed Association, Earth Justice, and the Humane Society of the US. She enjoys life on a small farm in Spencer, Indiana, in the good company of dogs, cats, donkeys, goats, alpacas, chickens, ducks, guinea fowl, and honeybees. So she's living everyone's dream life, in other words. Next, we have Tanner Faubourg. Tanner grew up on a farm in rural Iowa, where he saw firsthand the realities of industrial livestock production. After leaving the farm for college, followed by several years traveling abroad, he decided to move back to Iowa, where he now leads a Des Moines-based nonprofit working on community-based sustainability initiatives. His passion for sustainability led Tanner to his partnership with the Transformation Project to transition his family's farm away from hog confinement and sustainable plant-based operation, growing specialty mushrooms. We're going in now. And finally, we have the lovely Samantha Gasson. Samantha owns and operates Bull City Farm, which is just outside of Durham, North Carolina. It's a diversified pastured livestock operation that she runs with her husband, Scott, and their 3 children. Scott is also here, if anyone wants to say hi. Sam also leads the Food Animal Concern Trust, or FACTS, peer-to-peer humane mentorship program, which connects higher welfare farmer mentors and mentees across the country to help them learn from one another and grow their farm businesses. This role provides Samantha with a unique perspective to see not only the challenges faced by her own diversified livestock farm in North Carolina, but the struggles of humane livestock farmers nationwide. So we're going to dive right in. We're going to start with you, Sherry. So SRAP has, a team of folks that are dedicated to helping contract farmers transition out of industrial agriculture. Greg Watts is one of the farmers that works with SRAP. He has this incredible story of opening up his barn doors, ending up in the New York Times, and obviously the industry had a lot of feelings about that, about how that was presented. So I'd love to hear from you about, some of the experiences of the contract growers that you all are working with. What are their main barriers and their challenges they face when they're trying to get out? And what kind of reaction does the industry have to them when they really share their story and how the current system impacts them?
Thank you for am I on? Yeah, okay. Thanks for having me. I just found out yesterday I'm doing this, so I apologize for not being as funny or fun as Craig Watts is, but I'll try to do my best. The good news is we talk about this stuff every day, so I can really kind of wing it and hopefully provide you with some information. Craig Watts used to be a former contract grower for Purdue. He is now working in advocacy realm with Socially Responsible Agriculture Project. Whenever I joined the organization back in 2020, early 2020, Craig and I started having a conversation about what his dream job was. And really what he wanted to do was to lead a team of people like him who were able to escape the system and to get out there and to really advocate for better food and agriculture systems, for regenerative agriculture, resilience in our food system, et cetera. And so we started talking about, why don't we do that? Let's build and design and launch a program called the Contract Grower Transition Program so that we can actually try to help these growers not only get out of the system, but try to stop them from getting into it in the first place. And so we've really been doing a lot of research, thanks to Jake Davis, who I think you'll hear from later on. We've been doing a lot of research about what are the barriers, what's holding them back, what are the messages that are out there that the industry is promoting to really get these growers to join this system. And so I want you to think about, as a potential contract grower, there's a lot of reasons why that they might want to join this system and to become part of it. That it seems to promise a guaranteed income. It seems to promise some financial freedom from hardship on the farm. Being a farmer is not easy. It could keep the kids on the farm. I've heard that a lot from farmers who believe that, this is a way to keep their kids working on the farm and invested and interested in agriculture. And so they believe all these things. And when they're considering going into contract farming, there's a lot of pressure. Jake in the report that he did for us, that we're talking about integrators, we're talking about industry promoters, we're talking about front groups that are out there. Even banks and realtors are out there trying to sell them property to get them involved in contract growing if they're a new farmer considering going into it. And so really there's a lot of pressure coming at them whenever they're thinking about doing this. It seems to make good financial sense when they listen to the banks and they think about some of the policy that supports them to get into that. So there's policy that there's really a lack of enforcement of regulations around contract growing. There's financial incentives that will help them get into it. There's guaranteed loans that will help them get into it. So essentially, it seems really easy to get in. Unfortunately, it's hard to get out once you get in and you realize that it's kind of a system that's rigged against you. And so what we started thinking about and are still thinking about as we design this program out is like, how can we actually get these folks out of here? They believe that if they're going to work hard, they'll do a great job. That is true for a few people. We know that. But we also know that for most small farmers, they're exploited by the system. Corey just said it all. We're done. But the vertical integration, the control that these corporations have over the system really creates an imbalance of power. It means that they lock them into these contracts that are exploitative. They can push down the prices for these farmers and ranchers. They can drive independent producers off the land. There's a lot of problems with this system. And once they get in, we have other contract growers that we've since hired that are on our staff that have really, struggled within that system and had to get out. One filed bankruptcy, the other had to sell the farm. They know the hardships that are involved in this type of agriculture. And so through the Contract Grower Transition Program, we're really trying to figure out what those barriers are. These growers are also, I should say, scared to speak up. We've had people call Craig who are considering suicide. They're talking about potentially losing their multi-generational farm. Who wants to be the farmer that loses their land that has been in their family for decades, generations? And so we've got people who are mentally distraught, physically distraught. They're trying to figure out how to save that farm, and they're scared. They're scared of the industry. These integrators oftentimes have essentially monopolies in regions around the country. So if they only have one integrator to work with, they want to lay low. They don't want to speak up. They don't want to say anything. They don't want to cause this integrator to drop them from their contract. So I think there are some other people that will be talking today that could probably speak to some retaliation from the industry. Craig certainly got it. The industry likes to paint him as someone who didn't handle his animals well, who didn't do the things that actually he's got paperwork for years of them congratulating him on how he does things really well for them. And so I think they're trying to turn the story around on him to make it look like he's the crazy one and just couldn't handle his operation when actually it wasn't true at all. So I think there's a lot of retaliation. They will blackball you. They will cut your contract. And when you're talking about being millions of dollars in debt, that's really scary. So these growers take on tons of debt in order to build these operations, to build these barns, or they buy into it by buying the property, going into it as a new small farmer and realizing quite quickly that the math just doesn't work out. So through the Contract Grower Transition Program, we've realized there are some pathways out. They can go into advocacy. They can transition, like with the transformation program, that's terrific in helping farmers, do something else with those operations. But there's no clear cut path yet. And we're really trying to figure out like, what does that path look like? Who's out there to be able to provide the resources for them? Can we get debt relief for them? What are the ways that we can actually support these growers as they get out? So that's why we started the contract grower transition program.
And how has the reaction in your community been to your transition?
It's been a long path, for sure. I'd say the hardest thing at first is just to get my family and people to realize that change is possible. I think after a long time, I mean, we had, Wendell Murphy came to our doorstep when I was just a little kid and offered this amazing, it seemed amazing at the time, this deal to build 2 hog confinement buildings. And then, it seemed to make sense at the time. And now 30 years later, it's changed a bit and there are CAFOs everywhere. And what really resonated what you said was it's something that's easy to get into. It's hard to get out because a lot of these things, they come to your door and they give you all these offers and 0% loan and it sounds great. And then things change as it goes along, but those buildings have value. And then, so for my parents, they wanted to get out of hog farming, but that was essentially their retirement fund. So you have that, it's half their income as well. And then it's 30 years. I mean, 30 years of doing something, every day. It's hard to even imagine the possibility of doing something else, something drastically different. And it's kind of the same way, in those 30 years, there's been, the tide has been shifting in the wrong way. There's been a proliferation of CAFOs and commodity crops where everyone seems to be, growing row crops, corn and soybeans, and then, putting up CAFOs with chickens and turkeys and hogs. So it seems to be going against the grain, which seems intimidating. Everybody's doing something a certain way. I talked about the idea, well, you want to get out of this, let me help. But then everybody thinks it's a crazy idea. And then there's also just the, how do you do this? So, we started looking around, I started doing this myself, just thinking, well, how can we retrofit these buildings and make money? And this was kind of, you do this and you get a lot of negative feedback. All the neighbors are, laughing and rolling their eyes. Oh, here's Tanner with another crazy idea. So you hear this kind of negative feedback loop, and it's challenging. So then then the family that they're already on the fence, they think, well, I don't know. I want to get out of this, but it seems too much of a challenge, too difficult. What if the neighbors laugh at us? And then logistical things, where's the markets? I mean, once we do this, okay, we're going to grow. So we're transitioning from hogs to specialty mushrooms. Well, let's say the design works and all of this is going great. Where do we sell our produce? So that's another challenge. So what I tried to do was I was gone traveling for a few years and I got back and I wanted to make some really big changes to the farm and I was into sustainability. And I started some smaller projects that, I'd been gone for a while. So my parents were in the mood, like, yes, whatever he says, like, yes, just say yes and we'll do it. Let's keep him here for a little while. And so I wanted to have a ground mount solar installation that powers the entire farm. So that was the big, okay, how is this going to make sense? And the neighbors and everybody having that same mentality. And then we did it and the attitude changed. There's a lot of people, the neighbors, that started thinking, questioning and laughing. We built this system and then they started driving in and asking questions. And then they said, okay, you did it, but yeah, you're never going to pay this off. And then I showed them the numbers and said, this is a 6-year payback period. So then, they started, a lot of those same skeptical farmers started installing their own systems. And then my parents were like, okay, this worked. And we restored the barn and we're doing these small projects. Okay, so it was kind of a step-by-step process. And then I met the Transformation Project. And they've been just an amazing help because they've linked me with different experts and consultants. But then also just to have, people that you can talk to about this project that are excited, that are, yes, let's do this. This is great. How can I help? Just that attitude. And then going to events like this where you see people, yes, let's, that's great. I love what you're doing. You're not crazy. Keep going. Because just that, can really help, because when you're grinding this out while you're still working on the farm and still doing things can be challenging. So eventually with Transformation's help, we got to the stage where 3 months ago, we ended our 30-year contract with our integrator, and there are no pigs on the farm. So that was a big step. So now we just have to start growing some mushrooms and prove this can be successful, and hopefully it'll be a domino effect. The neighbors will, start making some changes or just believe that change is possible. And, we'll share all the data, and hopefully it can help with the change that's needed.
Thank you. And now, Sam, so Tanner's transition obviously led him out of animal agriculture altogether, but I imagine there's lots of farmers who are currently in the contract system who ideally would like to keep raising animals, but do it more humanely and maybe out on pasture the way you're doing at your own farm. And you have this really unique insight into not only what it's been like to try and exist as a higher welfare farm yourself, but through the network at FACT, you understand what's happening with farmers out in California, down this, like your reach is incredible. So I'd really love to hear from you more about the challenges for farmers who are still trying to raise animals outside of this conventional system, and like, what are they truly up against, not just to get off of the treadmill, but to succeed off of that treadmill.
All right. Does this work? Oh, God, you really have to put it near to your mouth. So it's really interesting listening to, especially Tana's story. We have a lot of pigs on our farm still, but they're out on pasture. They're not in a CAFO situation, which I think is what my husband and I always wanted to do. So my husband's probably about 3 generations off of the farm. I'm something like 33 generations off the farm. I'm from a family of Londoners. So I'm from the UK originally. So I don't have a lot of, when we first started out, we didn't have any farmland. We had to wait, and we had to save money. We had to do everything small. And then we sort of finally were able to purchase our own land. But it's sort of there's so many challenges. And I think land acquisition is probably the biggest challenge, but there's lots of little challenges that you wouldn't even really think of, I think, necessarily, but they build up and they become huge problems. And so as part of FACT's Humane Farming Mentorship Program, I talk to a lot of different farmers, and we have a guy in South Carolina, and he is great. His name is Don, and he was a mentor last year and he was a mentor this year. And the first time I talked to him as part of our intake, because I chat with all the farmers, which is so much fun. And part of our intake call, it took forever. It took almost an hour and a half because he had so much to tell me, and it was wonderful. But he was he's in his 70s, and he was a cow-calf is a cow-calf operation, but he was more of a traditional cow-calf operation. He was putting on his fertilizer every year, and he had his monocrop that he was growing, and then he was raising calves and selling them at the sale barn. All of which was sort of coming to the point where he wasn't making any money. It was becoming a problem. He was about 10 years ago at the end of his rope, and he was just going to be done getting rid of all of it. So his son comes home, sort of like Tanner over here. His son comes home and says, you know what you need to start doing? You need to start doing managing your pastures better. You need to start doing rotational grazing. So he fought him pretty hard for about 2 years. And then finally it was the time to make the decision. So he decided he was going to go ahead and give this crazy rotational grazing thing, just like Tana's parents are doing with him. He was going to give it a go, and he did. And first thing he did was he went to his ag agent and he's like, okay, I want to do this rotational grazing thing. I want to improve my pastures. I want to cut down on the amount of hay I have to feed my cows so that hopefully I can make money. And his agent told him he was crazy. So then he went to all of his friends in the cattle industry and he asked them the same thing. And they told him he was crazy. So finally, he's really stubborn. He's great. He's absolutely fantastic, but he's really, really stubborn. And so finally he he just decided he was going to figure it out on his own. So he went to FACT is actually who we went to. And FACT we do a lot of farmer education, and it's just why I love FACT. And I was one of those farmers getting educated before I started working for FACT. And he was taking webinars, and he was getting scholarships to workshops and 5 minutes crap. So much to say. But anyway, so he was doing all those things. He was taking advantage of all the programming that FACT has. And he ended up noticing this recurring theme about soil health and where your soil microbes need to be. And in order to do what you need to do to get your pastures where they need to be, you have got to focus on soil health. So he goes through state lab and he's like, okay, I don't want to test for nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. I want to test for my microbes in my soil. I want to see what they're doing. And there are tests out there. Our state labs do not test for those things. So you can't get those. So what you have to do is go to a private lab, and they're very expensive. So on an acre, you might get 10 samples, or a couple of acres, you'll get 10 samples. And each one of those samples, if you go to the state lab, is free. If you go to a private lab, you're looking at 150, 200 bucks per sample. So it's significant. Anyway, so this is where I'm going to go off. My husband told me I shouldn't tell you guys this story, but if you've ever been on a pasture walk, and I don't know how many of you have been on a pasture walk, and if you've not, you definitely should, because it's such a cool experience. And I've been on tons of them because I love them. I'm obsessed with them. But every single time you go on a pasture walk, your ag agent is going to pull out a pair of men's underwear. And it's the Hanes men's cotton underwear. They're going to dig a hole, tell you to dig a hole, and then put that underwear in the hole, cover it up, and then leave it for 2 months. And if when you go back, you pull up the underwear and it's eaten up and it's sort of fallen apart and everything, then you have good microbial health. If it isn't, then you don't. We live in 2023. You guys have noticed that, right? So this is what we're supposed to be doing, because we can't go to our state labs and get the testing done. And the last time, and I'm just gonna say this last thing, the last time I went on a pasture walk, this is what my husband told me I shouldn't share, is the guy pulls out his own underwear that he is not off of himself. I mean, out of his drawer. So he had gone to his drawer, and that morning I pulled out this nasty underwear, and then he told us to dig that and put that in there in the soil, which I don't want to put anybody's underwear in the soil, and we shouldn't have to. And it's not the state lab's fault. You know, they don't have funding, and they need funding. They need to be supported so they can support us. Did that help?
You know, it's not the barrier I expected, Sam, but I think it's the barrier we all needed to hear about. So I appreciate it.
That's all of life's problems solved by a pair of underwear in that story.
All right. So I want to finish this out for a question for each of you to answer. And I think it's going to have to be a little rapid fire because we're closing in. But, you know, we've all gathered here today to talk about the parts of our food system that aren't working, but also to envision a better system and what that might look like. So I'd love to hear from each of you, if you could just wave a magic wand and make one thing happen that levels the playing field for farmers who are trying to get off of or trying to exist off of the industrial ag treadmill. What would that one thing be? And Sherry, we can start with you.
I want to flip it around, actually. I don't want them to get off the treadmill. I want them never to get into it. So I want it to be just as easy for these farmers to be able to go and do the things that Samantha's doing on her farm, to be incentivized to do it, to be rewarded to do it, to be encouraged to do it, to have all the policy in place and all the funding in place, to be able to say, you know, when that person is figuring out whether or not they want to get into this industrial system versus a more sustainable regenerative system, that it really looks like an even playing field in terms of what they can do, and that they're supported going both ways. Our system today is just so far from that would be my magic wand moment there. And also just lifting up the voices of the Craig Watts and the Tanners and making sure that people, I think what he said about, you know, kind of standing up as an example of the possibility of getting out of the system, that's so important for these farmers who are desperate and trying to figure out a solution. So I would really, we have to get the messaging out there, and we have to get the support out there for these farmers.
That's more than one thing, but I'll take it. Tanner, what about you?
Okay, maybe we can figure out how to do this and how to grow these things, but how can we do it at a volume that's profitable, that allows family farms to continue and have multiple people on that farm, brothers and sisters and, your kids, and the market right now is just not there beyond, farmers markets and some smaller markets. So if we can find a way to find those markets for small farms, I think that'd be great.
Sam, can you do this without mentioning underwear?
I will not mention underwear, I promise. I think just, well, there's so many things, like Tanner said, there's so many different things that could help, but I think based on my story, I should just say we should focus more on the testing that smaller farmers need at a state level. So instead of just supporting the factory farms and doing what they need to do in the row crop guys, to really focus on the smaller scale farmers, not focus, but bring them in a little bit and give them the services that they need. And soil testing is one of them.
Well, thank you everyone for sharing your stories. It's been such a good conversation, and I'd be remiss to end this while I have a microphone and not take advantage of it to just say that the ASPCA does grant a lot of this great work, and we have an annual fund, which will be announced this April, the Fund to End Factory Farming. And I encourage folks to check it out and apply for grant funding, because we want to fund lots of the good work that's happening. And with that, I think we're done. Thanks.
Thank you all so much for sharing your stories. Now we're going to welcome up the next farmer panel. Donna Pearson McClish, Philip Barker, Bryn Bird, Mike Calicrate, and moderated by Lena Brooke from the Natural Resources Defense Council.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. They're asking us to put the management right there. Okay. Give you this one, Bryn. Okay.
That's okay. No worries. One more as well. Yeah, do you want to give it to? Yeah. Well, one more person.
Cash me, cash me, cash me, cash me.
Okay, I'm gonna sit right here.
Can you give a senator a microphone the first thing
Fill
of
up
the
office.
day?
Bup, 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 bup.
You're gonna blow your agenda time. Oh,
Oh, I like a hushing room. Hi, everybody. My name is Lena Brooke. I am the acting director of the Food and Agriculture Program with the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC. And we're one of the oldest environmental organizations in the United States. I work out of our San Francisco office, and it's good to be in DC. I'm going to do a quick intro and then really give the most of our time here for this panel, these wonderful guests that we have today. But I just really quickly wanted to say, kind of, as we so eloquently heard from Senator Booker this morning, today is really about recognizing that too many elements of our food system are broken, at least from the perspective of community health and well-being. I do think it's working really well for corporate agribusiness and lots of other actors, so props to that. And my team at NRDC works on policy change. We run corporate campaigns, and if needed, we also litigate in order to advance a more equitable, healthier, and climate-friendly food system. So these days, we're really trying to advance organic and regenerative agricultural practices. We're trying to get the most toxic pesticides out of our food system, reduce harms from our industrial animal agriculture system, and to expand local and resilient food systems. So with that in mind, I'm going to do quick introductions for our panelists. And here to my right is Bryn Bird. Bryn helps her family with marketing operations and managing CSA subscriptions on their family farm, which is called Bird's Haven Farms in Granville, Ohio. And Bryn is also a fierce advocate for farmers and works with the policy committee of the National Farmers Union, where she's doing a lot of thinking about the Farm Bill and other avenues. And to her right is Donna Pearson McClish, and she's the founder of Common Ground Mobile Market and Mobile Food Hub, which are in the southern Kansas. And she is both an urban farmer and this mobile food hub operator, and they serve urban and rural families. And Donna actually runs the only African-American owned urban agricultural farm in the area of Kansas where she lives. Yeah. And she comes from a long line of multi-generation farmers. And next we have Philip Barker, who is the co-founder of Operation Spring Plant, which is a grassroots nonprofit organization that serves Black farmers and farmers from small rural communities. And Philip is a leader and an advocate with over 40 years of experience in farming, animal husbandry, and marketing. And finally, Mike Calicrate is rounding us out today, and he is a farmer rancher, a business entrepreneur, and family farm advocate as well. There's a lot of hyphenations here. You guys are such an impressive bunch. And Mike is based in Colorado. That's not true. You're based in Kansas, aren't you? Both, okay. And he's founded Ranch Food Direct, which is a beef company and a regional food hub. And he's also a farmer rancher and raises cattle, hogs, and chickens using a multi-species regenerative agricultural model. So now that you guys know who is here, I'm gonna really turn this over to starting with Bryn and getting to hear a little bit about how these folks are feeding their communities in different ways. So Bryn, I'm gonna start with you. As I think folks may be aware, farmers and their communities have faced economic challenges for decades now. And according to the latest USDA data from the Economic Research Service, a farmer sees only about 14.5 cents of every dollar that's spent on food in the United States. And the rest, the 85 cents or so, goes to a variety of different off-farm costs that could be marketing, retailing, distribution, et cetera. So even in these inflationary times, when customers are being asked to spend a lot more at the checkout, farmers are actually not seeing really a lot of benefit from this. And this has been going on for a really long time. So given your role as an organic produce farmer, I'd love for you to share your perspective on this question of the true cost of food, and especially what the government could and should be doing to kind of ensure that farmers are earning a fair living while working the land.
Thank you. I have some notes because they're trying to keep us back on schedule. And so I don't want to speak too long today. My family's been farming for 28 years in Central Ohio. When we started, we were corn and soybean farmers because we're from Ohio. And then back at that time, you know, we would get checks in the mail from the government for various programs that you didn't even know you were signing up for, and they just would come along in the mail. And the day that, you know, my dad, I'm really lucky that my dad saw that system wasn't going to work for our family. It wasn't going to be something that we had wanted to be a part of and to get on that treadmill. And so we switched to produce, and the checks stopped coming. And actually we had to repay something even when we were in our transition time. And so I think, you know, being a part of that immediately made me realize that we're not playing on the same field. I think Americans haven't seen the true cost of food in our history. You know, as Americans, we have continually suppressed the price of food from our founding. And because of that, I don't think that many consumers understand the price of food. We suppress it, all of our meat, our eggs, our dairy. And, you know, the one area that we even suppress is produce, because we import it from countries that continue to have terrible humane policies and farm worker and what we do with our farm workers. And so I think that, you know, we just haven't had a chance to see the true cost of food. And I keep joking, the time we're seeing the true cost of food is eggs right now, and everybody's freaking out and they're just trying to find substitutes, and everybody on TikTok is talking about it. And I've been asked about it, and for the first time ever at the farm market, our eggs are cheaper than the eggs at the grocery store. And people have been asking me, like, what should we do? And my answer is notice the cost of food, notice what egg production is, notice how much this is costing you. Because we don't know how much food costs. And at first, I mean, that's our first thing, is to have this conversation. What is the cost of food? Because we hide it. We hide it through these subsidies, and we've made a social contract that we agree with it. We agree that some foods need to be subsidized. We have agreed with that as a country for a long time. We just haven't agreed that we should subsidize fresh fruits and vegetables, mostly. I also think that we are really hiding the mask and masking the cost of the environmental costs of this to our community and what the true cost of it is to the environment. I live in central Ohio. We live on one of the largest aquifers in the United States. We still have water. So many places in the United States don't have water. I live in an area that is fresh with water. I have so much water. We don't even have to irrigate. We have rain. And if I wanted to irrigate, I can just freely pull it up from the ground because my state doesn't have really any water laws around it. But the problem is that companies see that too. And we are having a huge onshoring of companies coming to Central Ohio with chip manufacturing and all the servers. We have so many servers that want to come into Central Ohio for our water. And because of that, we're just taking prime farmland out of production. We lost 4,000 acres of prime farmland in one night to chip manufacturing in prime farmland, and they're going to use 3 million gallons of water a day that can't be recycled. And so we have to kind of have these conversations. I know there's a lot of environmental groups here too, and I really think that's a part of this conversation is what's the true cost of food when we're taking prime farmland out all the time. Farmers don't want a handout, we want a hand up. And that's a big thing too, to have a conversation. I don't need more hoop houses. I don't need more crop insurance. Those programs are great. They are helpful, but they're great on a small scale. And I just have to echo a lot of what Tanner had to say. The thing that we need is huge, massive investment into regional food systems and regional food structures. My family, we've been doing it for 28 years and we're pretty good at it. But we sell at a farm market and we sell to institutional buyers, and we try to sell to things like farm to school, but the schools can't buy from us. They don't have the regional infrastructure to do this. And when we continue to try and sell to our restaurants, I say every year there's a new chef, and every year I have to go out and recreate that relationship to get my food there. And it's stressful. And I have farmer friends, and we have neighbors who look at us and they're like, that's kind of cool. You do the CSA thing. That seems neat. How do we get into it? But then when I have a conversation and it's very easy for them to sell their product into multinational company that's going to market it and sell it around the world for them, and they just have to take it to slaughter, whereas I have to figure out where every single tomato is going to be sold before I grow it. You're asking us to jump through hoops that we might not be able to do. And so the investment in the Farm Bill also has to really come into some of these larger distribution networks that we need. I will say that the GusNIP program proves that this works. And I do know after talking to the majority House Ag Committee, they are going to look to try and do the food box program again through SNAP this year. And that's part of the Farm Bill. And again, we know that that's just going to continue to hurt small farmers, where we could be pushing at the GusNIP program, where our family farm gets extra dollars and it's helping people to access fresh fruits and vegetables. I think that's all I'm going to say because I'm going to get too far over for you. But I think mostly, I see Lorette Picciano is here from Rural Coalition, and Lorette taught me a long time ago, and I used to work with her. You need to keep farmers at the heart of everything you're working on. When you're doing your coalition building and stuff, be sure you have farmers sitting at the table. Be sure you have people in production who can say, it's hard for me to transition. I'm not a bad farmer. I just don't know how am I going to sell my tomatoes at market this summer. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Bryn. Yeah, give her a hand. I think there's going to be a recurring theme today around market development and resilient local and regional food systems. And it's also a nice segue into, I think, giving Donna a chance to share her story. But let me tee this up for a second. So Donna, through the conversations we've had over the last couple of weeks, I think what I've recognized is you hold this really interesting role of kind of bridging the gap between food production, your urban farmer hat, and then efforts to improve food security in your community, right? That's right. So we're not solving hunger. And we also saw a few years ago, especially in the height of the COVID pandemic, how fragile our food supply chains are. Grocery shelves were empty. The large distributors really struggled. And yet we also saw how nimble smaller producers were. They were able to pivot, and farmers markets were thriving. And so were CSA programs and other direct to consumer channels. And so Donna, based on your have lived experience, what do you think we need from kind of a policy standpoint to really improve community food security? And I'm thinking about this a lot, knowing that more stressors are going to come our way, whether it's climate change related or pandemic related. We've learned a lot, and we know we need to be doing different. So I think you have a lot to offer on this question. I'm hoping you'll share it with us.
Thank you, Lena. Have to hold it really close. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. It's indeed an honor and a privilege to be among such greatness. Thank you for inviting us to the Food Not Feed Summit. I'm Donna Pearson McClish. I'm CEO of Common Ground Producers and Growers Mobile Market and Mobile Food Hub. I am a farmer. My daughter is here with me, Keisha. She's our mental health therapist for Common Ground. There's a lot going on, and I think I'd like to give you the perspective from boots on the ground. I keep thinking about that. What we're seeing day to day as we deliver produce to senior centers and to families and individuals. If you don't remember anything today that I've said, please remember that food has to be a policy issue, not a profit issue. When America changes its focus to food being just as important as the infrastructure, as bridges, as roads, because when we have healthy farmers, we have healthy communities, we have healthy food, we have healthy families. So Common Ground believes this entirely, that we have to start with the policy issues. No longer is food insecurity and food deserts an urban issue. It's also become a rural issue. Now, there's a difference between a food desert and food insecurity. A food desert is an area, it's a place. Food insecurity impacts the quality of life. I can live in a food desert area. How many of you know what a food desert area is? Okay. I can live in a food desert area and I'm not being food insecure because I have the wherewithal, the funds, the means, the transportation for healthy food. Access is critical. So what the mobile market does is we work with a network of growers that help us grow. We grow also on our farm. We buy from those producers. We pay them an equitable wage. We move food to where it needs to go. So it's accessible. It's a quality of food, it's accessible, and people know where their food comes from. So with that in mind, we need to provide opportunities for communities and stakeholders' input into the food system. We can no longer tell people what they need. We have to ask them what they need. So we can be culturally specific, we can be diversively specific, if that's the word. But we have to diversify where our food comes from, how it looks, and to what communities we are serving. When we go out to serve our senior centers, we have some that are Hispanic, we have some that are African American. So we try our best to make the food available that is culturally specific. So kind of what we do, just to give you a brief, we aggregate from our farmers. So they let us know what they have on a given day, given week. We make a list. We make a price list. We take SNAP, EBT, we're part of Double Up Food Bucks. We take all forms of payment, including senior market vouchers. That is critical because what we found out when we first started in 2014, and I'll just interject some of this as I talk, what we found out that seniors had their senior market vouchers that have to be spent at the farmer's market, but there's no farmer's market in the area. So USDA were distributing this money. So in 2000, we started working with senior centers in 2014. 2018, we had increased their spending power with the senior market vouchers 218% because we made food accessible. You have to make food accessible. You have to take food to where it needs to go. Let me see here. One of our main goals is to emphasize that farmers need to be paid equitable wages for what they do. They have to be paid for what they do, the labor they put in, and they need operational cost. What I'd like to see in the Farm Bill is that USDA make the transference of thought from giving out grants that provide infrastructure, money for operational expenses, but no money for food. The grants do not allow us to pay farmers for food. In 2020, we were one of the first of 7 recipients of the UAIP grant, Urban Ag Implementation Grant. So if grants can include 3 things, food, staff, and transportation, we can begin to minimize the issues of accessibility, good quality food, farmer support, all of that as we work to diminish food insecurity and food desert areas and all of the issues that we face.
That's
Okay.
perfect.
Okay. Thank you.
You actually also answered the second question that I wasn't going to get to ask you anyway, so that was amazing. Hi, Philip. Good to meet you. Yeah, so, okay, we're gonna kind of pivot to another essential issue in our food system, which is discrimination of Black farmers. And I know that's an area that you've been working on quite a bit. And for folks, who may not be familiar with the history, the sort of shorthand is that farmers of color, and especially Black farmers, have faced generations of discriminatory lending and market practices and a lot of other structural barriers that really prevent them from accessing land, from accessing technical support and help during times of crisis. So to remedy this, we've seen some measure of support from Congress and the Biden administration. They've stepped up in recent years to provide some much needed relief for Black farmers. And yet we're also seeing that this is being thwarted. So knowing your work in this area, Philip, I'm hoping you can sort of speak to 2 things. One, I'm wondering whether Black farmers in your communities are actually being able to access the resources, the $800 million in the Inflation Reduction Act that was allocated to address, to provide relief. So is this actually working? And then I'm also wondering if you can share some other steps for change in addition to debt relief that might help level the playing field for Black farmers and ranchers.
We have to remember for years,
You're good. Hold it up.
the Farm Bill was never written for small farmers in the beginning. And so we've been fighting against that for a number of years. When you look at the $800 million that was recently allocated, the farmers actually, what they have right now is 60 days delinquent. The government has been bringing their notes up to date. If you're more than 60 days delinquent and have had foreclosure letters, they paid off all of that debt. And in our community, we just basically don't understand that move, but that was the way it was written. Black farmers need relief. In our community, we're having a major problem with getting our kids to come back to the farm, number one. And that, for us, put us at a real risk of not being in agriculture. We would like to see more money put into programs that will allow us to bring the next generation forward more. What we look at, and I made a list of some of the things that I think in our community that we see that need to be improved. So I would like to just read those and go through them quickly. Black farmers are investing time and money in building local land markets, growing on smaller farms. The infrastructure by adding greenhouses, hoop houses as a way of increasing production. Black farmers are feeling like they have an opportunity to be a part of the next farm bill. What we have to do is make sure that all of our farms and our communities thrive. That is a problem for us in many ways. What we're finding in our community also is that the loss of our land, the strategies that are being used against us to move other farmers forward, we're having very much difficulties in getting access to capital. The land that we're buying is contaminated a lot of times. We can't get the better farms. We're having a real struggle when it comes to actually making the changes on the farm that we need to survive. Survival is the key. We have to go back when we're looking at Black farmers, back to the settlement and that suit. We were never given the settlement was never issued to us, really. $10 million is still held by other entities, not been distributed even to Black farmers now. So what we're trying to do in Operation Spring Plant is trying to make sure that our farmers understand where they need to be with conservation. There are a lot of tools out there that now that we can use, and we're trying to make sure our farmers understand those tools, how to use them and make them accessible for them. Operation Spring Plant work continue to be a lot harder today than it used to be, because we have having farmers who are saying that, why should they keep going? How do we level this playing field? There are a lot of competition out there now for our land. Communities are being built all over. In North Carolina, we have some cities that are growing really fast. So our growers are trying to learn how to grow on smaller tracts. They add infrastructure that allow them to stay on their land. But the main key is the next generation, because we are aging out. And if we are not successful in bringing farmers back to the farm, then USDA have really achieved what they set out to do with Black farmers, and that put us off of the land.
All right, Mike. So let's bring the conversation back to animal agriculture, right? Like the panel before us. You've been running an independent meat company for decades. And I think you know firsthand, we've talked a little bit about this, about how difficult it is to reach consumers, despite the fact that you're offering a really excellent product. And we talked a little bit about your perspectives on kind of what's missing in our food system that kind of keeps us from creating viable direct-to-consumer markets. And I know Bryn spoke a lot about this. Tanner had spoken about this. And I wanted to hear from you, based on your experience, again, being a farmer rancher, but also a business owner, what do you think the key solutions are and kind of the points of intervention through a policy like the Farm Bill?
In 1990, I figured out I was playing in a fool's game as a cattle producer. Like Senator Booker said, I was one of those guys that had 20 buyers in 1978. And by 1998, I had no buyers. I had 14,000 cattle in a 12,000 head feedlot. I had built 2 2 feedlots in Northwest Kansas, around St. Francis, after graduating from Colorado State University in 75 with an animal science degree. And I tell people, don't confuse that with animal husbandry. And so having no buyers and having to call Secretary Glickman, Ag Secretary Glickman, I asked him the question, why don't you enforce the Packers and Stockyards Act? That would really help me and a lot of other people as well. And he said, well, Mike, in this modern day of globalization, we really need big companies that can do business globally. But he did call ConAgra, which is now JBS, and forced them to buy all of my cattle. And by 1999, I was empty and thinking about my next steps. So I didn't want to get out of the cattle business. I just decided to sell direct, and I formed a company called Ranch Foods Direct. Well, thankfully, I had the resources to do it, and I wouldn't suggest that anyone else do that, but we did build it. So now we process our livestock on site in St. Francis, Kansas. Everything is really built around a livestock model. Thinking about regenerative agriculture, we need that manure to go back to the soil, the feed that's produced on the farm to be fed to the livestock. But what we really need is a market, a direct market to the consumer as much as possible, with as many dollars going back to the farm and ranch gate and those workers who have been left out as possible. And so this is the model we created. So I not only process for Calicrate Cattle Company, hogs and cattle, but we also process for other people. Today, the industrial model that's been created is returning around 35% of the beef dollar back to the producer. At Ranch Foods Direct, if you process cattle with us and pack it and make it retail ready, we're getting almost 80% back to the producer. So really, who's the most efficient? And the other thing is, these are producers that are selling below the price of Walmart and the other big box stores. So who's really the most affordable? And if only we could get things back like a hide value. When I started in 2000, we got $100 for a hide. That would, just getting that back, and that's something that's been monopolized and taken over by the big packers. But if we could just get the hide values back, that would literally build new local regional infrastructure on its own. Just the value of a hide that is currently now being composted and thrown away, it ends up back in our soil, but a far better use would be on our feet. And so what I would really like to see happen is I would like to see President Biden's 2020 executive order be reflected in the Farm Bill. I would like to see Senator Booker become the chair of the Senate Ag Committee.
Agreed.
But the things that we really need in this Farm Bill is we need antitrust law enforcement, of course. We have to control the predators in the market, which is JBS, Tyson, Cargill, Smithfield, the big multinational corporations. We've got to get truth in labeling. No one would believe, almost no one would believe that the USDA is committing the biggest food fraud of all with their product of the USA label. So meat comes in from other countries that's reboxed and it gets the product of the USA label, comes in below cost of production and puts our own producers out of business. So we need truth in labeling. Subsidies, they've got to be redirected for food that we want, food that's healthy. Senator Booker did a great job of describing how subsidies could be better utilized. But I would suggest if we can get more dollars of the consumer spending back to the farm and ranch gate and to workers, we really don't need subsidies to any large extent. We just need to capture more of those food dollars back where they belong. The other thing that is a major barrier to people like us that want to build alternative pathways and build that processing infrastructure is USDA inspection. Why does USDA make it so hard on small plants while allowing the Batista brothers with JBS to self-inspect? Really? The company that shipped rotten meat into the United States under the watchful eye of Al Almanza with USDA? And when he was made to stop, Al Almanza went to work for JBS. The other thing we need that could be a huge game changer, the government with any meat purchasing should prioritize local regional until it is exhausted. Only then would they buy from a multinational meat packer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have so many more questions for the four of you that unfortunately I'm not going to get to ask this morning because we have to continue with our program. But I want to just say a really, really big thank you for being here, for your brilliant ideas. And I hope those of you in the audience have a chance to also just connect with these folks one-on-one and learn more from them in that way throughout the day.
All right. Well, one, we want to thank all the farmers who participated today for sharing their stories. We keep in mind what they had to say and work together to support them. And now I'm excited to welcome up Dr. Allison Grantham, a food supply chain expert, who's going to talk about the economics of farmers growing healthy food for their neighbors. Allison?
All right, thank you very much. I'm Allison, and I am a consultant who works across the food system to bring science and data to decision makers to enable a better food system for all of us. And I'm here today to do just that, to bring you all on a dive into data on farm incomes by commodity, to explore why today's American farmers are growing so much feed and so little healthy food for the American people. But before we get started with the data, I'm going to start with a short history for some important context. Today, we need to come to understand how we got to this moment where farms grow mountains of calories and protein, primarily in the form of corn and soybeans. And Americans increasingly suffer skyrocketing rates of diseases caused by overconsumption of animal products and highly processed foods. And what healthy foods they do consume are increasingly imported. We need to understand this so we can chart a course to American farmers feeding their neighbors healthy foods as the norm and not the exception in the American food system. So let's look at what the current allocation of ag land is in the US. The first thing I really want to point out about this is there's often a scarcity mindset that comes to agriculture, but there is a lot of ag land. We have almost 1 billion acres of farmland in the United States. That's nearly 3 acres for every person in the country. But I don't live on 3 acres or a farm, and neither do 98% of Americans. The last person to live on a farm in my family was my grandmother. She was the 9th of 9 kids born to tenant farmers in Western Arkansas in 1929. The farm crisis that precipitated her family's migration to work in the cement plants of Southern California also precipitated the country's first farm bill in 1933. Though that farm bill focused on commodity price support and other forms of farmer relief, it did not really stem the precipitous exodus of Americans from farms and farming. However, the forms of government support that started with that 1933 Farm Bill continue to shape this ag landscape that we see today. That landscape is stable in terms of land footprint. We've had about 1 billion acres of farmland since the 50s. It is prolific in terms of calorie and protein production, but increasingly devoid of the farmers and farm workers necessary to produce many of the healthy foods also absent from most Americans' plates. And you can see that in how that land is allocated. Sorry, this originally had some color coding, and so the parts that were yellow, the pasture land, the crop land is largely producing feed. So we have about 90 million acres of that cropland in corn, about 90 million acres in soy, about 50 million acres in hay. And those are all things that we primarily use to feed animals, as well as that pasture land. What we are using to feed people, you can't even really see there, is about 15 million acres. That's 6% of what we've got to work with. So the reason why we have this situation, a lot of it has to do with the incentive system that we have in place. And farm income by commodity is a great way to explore why this is. So farm incomes, what you can vary a lot by commodity type. What's important to look at here is not just the total, but the variability. That's been touched on a lot today. The lack of support for specialty crop growers results in a lot of volatility in their incomes. And you don't see that in corn farmer incomes. Not only are those incomes high, they are extremely stable year to year, or relatively stable, maybe not stable relative to the typical American salaried workers' income, but much more stable than what we see for specialty crop producers. The other thing that I really want to point out there is that bright yellow line at the top. That's cotton. That is not anything that anybody eats. And it is so high because of the government supports and subsidies that we have for cotton growers. Farm incomes, however, for growers of food crops like wheat and specialty crops are in general much lower than what we see for corn and cotton growers. So what's explaining this? There is lots to unpack, but some of the biggest drivers of farm incomes are commodity prices, government payments, and then one that gets a little bit less attention, but legacies of and current land and tax policy. That is sort of the other piece of the asset puzzle. And then interest rates and other production costs, largely labor is something that comes into play. So which commodities a farm produces interacts with all of these driving factors and determines the farm's income. Taking a step back, at the highest levels, been on an upward trajectory. And in the last 10 years, farm household incomes have averaged 40% higher than the mean household income in the United States. And this is a dramatically different reality than the one that my grandmother's family, for instance, experienced at the time when we were implementing the first farm bill in the 30s. And so what is driving this divergence? And so I think it's important to sort of look at this trend, that ratio. Okay, so it's a farm household, but how much of that farm household income is actually coming from farming? And a lot of understanding farm household income has to do with understanding who those farm households are on average and what their other non-farm income is. So farm income was a declining portion of farm household income from 1960, well, actually longer ago than that, 1930s, on until the 2000s, when it bottomed out at less than 10%. So really the farm portion of the income was almost a rounding error, even to the households who themselves were farming. And that's, when you're thinking about the decision-making and incentives, understanding that ratio is really critical to sort of understanding how people are managing their financial risks and making decisions. And then this trend reversed in recent years. Farm income is still a relatively minor component of farm household income at about 20%. But since it dipped down below 10, you can see it's really increased. So that lowest period was 1988 through 2009, when it was averaged just 12%. And so since 2009, it's been increasing, averaging about 21% over the last decade. So what happened in the late 2000s that brought us to this moment? We've taken sort of a brief detour to appreciate the relative importance of farm income to farm households. Now let's dig back into the factors that explain farm income and why it's been growing. So what has been going on with farm incomes? So the 2022 farm income forecasts indicate that net farm income is at its highest level since 1973, and net cash farm income is at its highest level on record in inflation adjusted dollars. So that's not just a relic of the high inflation that we have seen this last year. And the biggest reason for this is increases in commodity prices. So you can see that big green bar over there on the left is price change. That tiny one at 6.8% or $6.8 billion is quantity change, and $2.1 billion accounted for by other changes. So what has been driving this is soy and corn prices have been absolutely through the roof. They have flirted with all-time highs for much of the last few years, but they really have reached exceptional highs in 2022. Corn receipts are forecasted to increase by more than 27% in 2022, due exclusively to higher prices. Soy is a story, sorry you can't see it there, but of both higher prices and higher volumes moving. So that's the commodity price piece of the story. Then there's the government payment piece of the story. And this is really a massive one. You know, we've been talking about programs that are $50 million for GusNIP and how great it would be to expand that. I think it's important to note the scale of this axis here on the left is $1 billion. And we had been relatively stable. 2018 is a decent base year to look at if you ignore that MFP, the light blue portion of the bar. So around $7-8 billion is what we had been routinely spending on our farm sector through the Farm Bill. And then things just absolutely exploded, and we started spending money on the farm sector outside of the Farm Bill. And we went from spending $7 or $8 billion a year to almost $50 billion in 2020. When direct government payments accounted for nearly 40% of farm income. So we have not, my point here is we can do big things with government spending. The way that we have been spending to change it has not been to change the farm sector, it has been to uphold the status quo. But the scale of what we are capable of throwing at this sector is on the order of $50 billion, not $50 million. And we should take that level of ambition into our negotiations for this next Farm Bill. And that large amount of money has largely gone to uphold this status quo. So cotton growers were one of the largest beneficiaries of that, and that is the reason why their incomes are at such standout levels. Oh, darn, you can't see this. Okay, so what you have here and can't see all that well is another piece of the puzzle. So we've talked about commodity prices, we've talked about government subsidies. Now we're talking about another piece that the government has a lot of control over, and that is land policy and tax policy. So this graph here is showing a comparison of different asset classes. And farmland as an asset class is outcompetes the S&P 500 over the last, I think it's about 15-year timescale on that graph, and is one of the lowest taxed asset classes in the US, which has made it very attractive to investors and is again changing the incentive structure that we have around how we decide what we're doing with that 900 million acres of farmland. It is increasingly, those decisions are not being made by the folks who are farming that land. They are being made by people who are holding that land for the appreciation value. Simultaneously, we have this the last piece of that farm income puzzle, which is the cost of production. And I think, people wonder, okay, corn and soybeans, I understand that their prices are at record levels right now, but you can still gross a lot more per acre growing almonds or strawberries or lettuce. Why aren't growers switching? And it's not about the gross, it's about the net. And the problem that you can see here with specialty crops, which is that standout bar up there at the top right under the yellow one, is the percent of their cash expenses that go to labor. And they are at about 40%. Labor is a huge barrier to expansion of domestic healthy food production. We have had extremely unfriendly immigration policies over the last 20 years, and this is a big factor that's driving production out of the United States. So I'm going to close by bringing us back to this, what I think of as sort of opportunity space, and say, policies that we have are, what we have here is the rational response to the policies that we have in place. They encourage calorie productivity at all costs and currently skew this allocation of land tremendously towards livestock feed and away from what we need to escape this scourge of diet-related disease. We have plenty of space to shift this balance. Even if we are currently importing more than half of our produce, we are using 6% of our ag land to grow that. So we have more than enough space to bring it all back home, but we cannot do that under the current set of commodity price supports, crop insurance structure, labor policies that drive us to this current reality where we are. So that is my closing for today. Thank you very much for your time, and
Thank you so much, Allison, for that great information. Before introducing the next speakers, I just want to make a quick note for all of the reporters in the room and our farmer panelists. That would be Sam, Sherry, Tanner, Donna, Philip, Bryn, and Mike. In about 20 minutes, right after this session, we're inviting you all to meet at the back of the room. Dee's back there waving. We'd like to invite you to a press room for conversations there. And now I'm going to invite up Joe Maxwell and Jake Davis, who are going to be talking about policy actions for a shift to food not feed.
Well, hello, everyone. My name's Jake Davis. I'm a Missouri farmer, and when I'm not moving livestock or picking vegetables or helping my wife, Chelsea, run our food hub, I'm working to build a better food system. And I'm excited to be here with all of you because I know that's what we all share in common. And so I'm excited to talk today. We've talked already today a little bit about the why. Why should we be changing our food system? Why should we be finding a different approach? Dr. Bush did such a good job of talking about that from a science perspective. We heard from an equity perspective. We've heard the why. We've also heard an awful lot about the what. Why? What is the things we need to focus on? What can we be doing better in our food system? And if it's not clear yet, the win that Angela was talking about in her opening remarks today is now. Now is our moment to change the food system. But that's only going to happen if we can put together the who. And, you know, Senator Booker was pretty darn specific about this earlier. Mike Callicrate was pretty darn specific about this earlier. We have in this town an awful lot of money and an awful lot of folks walking the halls of our, Capitol building and office buildings, working to preserve the status quo. We saw from Allison's presentation that in a lot of cases, those corporate agribusinesses and their special interest front groups, they've got good economic reason to protect that status quo. And we've got to think about and begin the process here today of figuring out how we're going to get a new voice into the conversation. A new who needs to have a seat at the table when we write our federal farm policy this year. I want to take just a second with this slide because we've seen it a few times today, but when I saw this slide for the first time a few days ago, I literally had to sit back in my office chair in my office in Missouri and just sort of take it in. I think this slide itself deserves a round of applause that we could put you on here today. We've got environmentalists, we've got farmers, we've got faith-based groups, we've got health groups, we've got folks from all around the country, we've got people from all different walks of life, we've got minority organizations represented. We've got a new group, a new voice at the table coming together. We've also got the American people with us. Thanks to Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, we also had an opportunity to put a poll in the field recently to ask the American people what they thought about what we're saying here today. Food for our neighbors, not feed for livestock. And 78% of Americans, voting Americans who were polled, urban and rural, all across the country, statistically verified poll, 78% of them say we should be prioritizing in our federal farm policy food for our neighbors and not feed for livestock. But it's even better. Maybe. Again. Oh, too far. There we go. 88% of our citizens, our voting population, believe that we should be prioritizing healthy food that will lower healthcare costs for you and I when we pay our premiums and for the federal government and state governments around the country. This is a clear mandate from the American people that we are on the right track. But we also have to get this message and we have to put this conversation into a lot of well-meaning, overworked Hill staffers' inboxes and on their desks, and they've got to make sure that they get it to each and every one of our representatives and senators so that we can begin the process of saying, it is a new day. We have a new coalition, and this coalition demands to be heard, and we have the American people on our side. So the status quo will not stand. We have to make progress in this farm bill, and we have to make progress in farm bills to come. So I want to invite Joe Maxwell up to talk a little bit about what that progress looks like.
Thank you, Jake. All right, we're going to keep everybody on time, but I want for all of us to thank those working here in this hotel that allowed us to have such a great event. And I want to lift up every service employee that keeps Washington, D.C. going and churning. They're the unspoken heroes here in this hotel, as well as all across this city. Let's give them a round of applause. I'm going to, Angela said it, Jake said it, it's a new day. A new day dawning. A new day. And we're here in Washington, D.C., so that our voice can be heard and that we will be at the table as this farm bill is debated and negotiated. We can do this. What do we want to do? Well, some of us are getting ready to go on the Hill. There's about 150 people in the room. And there's over 700 people online that registered. And we're thankful for each one of you all. What do we want for? We're going to ask government. We're going to ask our government. We're going to ask our Congress to shift from feed to food. Let's understand what that means. We're asking our Congress to make the farm production of food for Americans as high a priority as they're making for feed for livestock raised industrially, not only here in this country, but as Scott Faber led us off, around the world. We are operating at a agricultural trade deficit. This great powerhouse of agriculture in this country is not feeding us, nor are they feeding the world. We need that changed. We need to increase financial and technical support. We need to lift up organizations. We're a proud member of Rural Coalition, and I was talking to Tyler Whitley and Transformation and all the other folks in this room about not only having assistance for technical, but we need resources and infrastructure, as the farmers indicated. You know, we spend millions of dollars. I'm a farmer, corn, soybeans. We spend millions of dollars of your taxpayer money making sure I can ship corn and soybeans down the Mississippi River. Millions of dollars in that lock system, right? Why can't we spend money making sure that the farmers you heard from today can access the markets with their fruits and vegetables? Why isn't that a priority as much as making sure that the Mississippi River can float a barge down it? It should be. Let's shift. Let's make a priority. Let's have the resources going behind feeding Americans healthy food. We need to tell them that this is us. This is us. And as we said, today it begins. Now listen, before we leave, we want you to actually start right now. Everybody here in the room and everybody online, it's not over. You're online, listen, we're getting ready to take a break and we're going to do some networking here in person. Wish you with us. However, what we're asking everyone to do is to use the link here. It will look up your members of Congress, U.S. senators, and member of the U.S. House. And we want you to call. We want you to do that right now. We want you to get your smartphone out. We want you to go to that link. And we want you to call. You can look in your folders, and the script is in your folders if you're here. For those online, we're going to leave this up as we take a break and get ready to do the networking. But open up your folders, look up the script, go to that URL, look up your member of Congress, and let's begin today. Let's lift up our voice. It's over 500 of us. We're getting ready to attack the Hill with almost 100 office meetings right after this. It begins today, as Senator Booker said. He believes we're joining together in a historic moment. Be part of it. Call your congressman. Thank you very much.